pear tree was in bloom, and it had no right to be. It stood inside a glass house with no roof left, no fire near it, snow banked against every bed. Still, the blossoms hung open, as if no one had told them what month this was. Rosamund found it on the first night after her in-laws put her out of Broadmere Hall. The ruin was all her husband's family had left her. Giles had the house, the name, the profitable orchards that went with both. Rosamund had one sterile acre, a boiler split down its seam, and £57 owed to a lender she'd never met. If the place failed inspection before spring, the creditors would sell it out from under her. She knelt and pressed her fingers into the soil, more from disbelief than curiosity, and felt real heat rise against her skin. She laughed once, unhappily. It was easier than crying. She had carried her father's grafting knife in her skirts since the will reading, more from habit than plan. She used it now to follow a line of damp brick to the western bed. Beneath it lay terracotta pipe, and inside it water trembled, though every tap on the estate had frozen. A brass collar ringed the pipe, stamped with two initials, L.H., and beneath them, the year 1841. Rosamund had been a Harrowby 6 years. She had never once heard that name spoken at Broadmere. Then her lantern caught fresh boot marks behind the tree. A root as thick as her wrist had been sawn half through, and the teeth marks matched, tooth for tooth. The pruning saw Giles had ordered out of the shed that same morning. Someone had known the Glasshouse was alive before she did. She bound the wound with strips torn from her petticoat, barred the broken door, and stayed beside the tree until dawn. She did not sleep. She told herself it was the cold. The estate cart arrived as the sky over the hawthorns turned the color of dishwater. Giles sat under a fur robe, looking as ever like a man who had never once been cold in his life. Pritchard climbed down with a spade. Neither had expected to find her still awake. "You were told to leave the grounds," Giles said. "This acre is mine. It becomes yours when you accept Matthew's debts with it." He glanced at the tree. "Until then, Pritchard will clear the dangerous growth." Rosamund pulled the binding aside and showed him the cut. Pritchard looked at his boots. Giles gave the wound no more attention than a broken chair. "The tree is diseased," he said. "You should thank me for removing it." The solicitor's gig appeared beyond the wall before Pritchard could lift the spade. Ambrose Pelling stepped down with a leather case under his coat, a narrow, careful man with a habit of reading every paper twice. "Mrs. Harrowby has until noon," he told Giles. "The bequest remains hers to accept." In the potting shed, Pelling laid the deed beside an inventory. The north glasshouse covered 60 feet by 28. The nursery acre ran from the brick wall to a line of old hawthorns. A private mortgage of £57, taken by Matthew during his final illness, fell due in 8 weeks. Rosamund remembered that loan. Matthew had said the money paid a London physician. Giles had arranged it and never once shown her the security. "Your mother-in-law offers £20 if you release the land to Giles," Pelling said. "There is also a railway ticket to Bristol." Her father's nursery outside Bristol had closed after his death. Its fields belonged to another grower now. £20 might buy a room and a winter's meals. It would also leave Giles free to destroy the only living thing in the glasshouse. Did Matthew know this parcel secured the loan? His signature and 2 witness marks are present. He was taking laudanum that week. Can the mortgage be challenged? Perhaps. A challenge costs money, and the lender may foreclose first. Rosamund looked through the cracked window. Giles stood beside the tree, speaking low to Pritchard. He had mocked the ruin at the will reading. Now he couldn't take his eyes off one white blossom, as though it had accused him of something. She signed the acceptance before the ink had time to dry. "You'll be back for the £20 by February," Giles said. "Then keep it ready. You have nowhere to sleep. There's a stove in this shed." The stove had no door. Half the roof leaked. The well pump gave water the color of strong tea. She named every defect and felt, oddly, less afraid for having named them. For 6 years she had revived Broadmere's orchards, while Giles took the praise at county dinners. Her work waved off as a pleasant habit, because it cost the estate nothing to praise. This ruined acre was the first ground her hands had ever been allowed to claim as her own. At noon the housemaid brought her trunk to the gate and left it without a word. Augusta sent no message either, which told Rosamund everything she needed to know. She dragged the trunk across the snow herself, and turned the cracked key with hands too cold to feel it. Pritchard's chain crossed the flowering bed twice before Rosamund stepped between the men and the tree. "The deed ends at the hawthorns," she said. "The estate map says the inner drain marks the boundary, Pritchard replied, holding up a fresh tracing, Broadmere Hall stamped in one corner. Its black line cut through the glasshouse, leaving the western bed on Giles's side. Rosamund had copied enough orchard plans for Matthew to know good ink from new. This line was dark and even. The rest had faded to brown. That line is newer than the map. Pritchard rolled it shut. Tell it to a judge. Giles gave her 3 days to remove her possessions from the disputed ground and left the cart ruts torn across her nursery beds as he drove away. Rosamund spent the morning making the shed livable, a slate over the stove opening, sacking stuffed into the broken window, clean snow melted for water she could trust. The inventory valued the surviving iron, timber, and glass at £9, a figure that seemed generous once she'd walked the place by daylight. 2 roof ribs had dropped. Ivy had opened the eastern brickwork. Only 12 unbroken panes remained. At the ironmonger's, she offered her wedding brooch, because there was nothing else left to offer. Mr. Sayer weighed it in his palm. Harrowby accounts pay slowly, he said. I won't carry another. This is my account. He glanced past her to 2 women, choosing lamp oil. People say the Glasshouse is coming down for a bottling works. On whose land? That appears to be the argument. He allowed her 12 shillings for the brooch and charged 9 for the supplies. She left with 3 shillings, a stove door, and the knowledge that Giles had plans for a ruin he claimed to despise. A girl waited at the north gate when she returned, perhaps 18, red hands, a basket under a flower cloth. Mom sent bread, she said. You gave her pears when my father died. Rosamund remembered Ada Pike, sewing mourning bands in the estate laundry. What's your name? Martha. Mr. Pritchard says we're not to help you. Then take the basket home. He already stopped Mam's washing work. The bread won't change that. They shared it beside the stove while Rosamund repaired the door. Martha knew which village roofs had sound slate, which farmers kept lath going to waste, and an old gardener who had worked the North Glasshouse before Giles was born. Hugh Fenwick came near sunset, leaning on an ash stick, his coat thick with wood smoke and damp wool. He studied the blossoms through the broken frame a long while before he thought to remove his cap. I thought they'd killed the last one, he said quietly. The last what? Hugh would only say that a Miss Harrowby had once raised pears here for tenant families, back when he was a boy carrying coal. She had taught widows to graft. When Rosamund showed him the split boiler, he frowned. We never burned coal in that house. The estate accounts charged 6 tons every winter. Then someone warmed it with figures. The roots had their own heat. He pointed his stick at a block stone channel along the west wall. She and Martha cleared it on their knees, and beneath the rotted leaves found a row of inspection caps. The first 2 were dry. The third came up warm, and Rosamund lifted it and heard water moving north, past the boundary shown on Pritchard's tracing. Hugh tested the nearest roof rib. The western bay might stand if we brace it. The eastern half wants rebuilding. How much? £30 for proper work. Less if the village gives you old glass and you pay in seedlings. She had 3 shillings and 8 weeks before the mortgage fell due, and wrote her order of work that night on the back of the inventory: stove and water first, 1 safe bay second, saleable cuttings third. A whole glass house could consume a fortune. 1 sound section might earn the next. That night the temperature fell. She banked the stove with broken packing wood, wrapped the wounded root in straw, and slept on her coat beside the potting bench, waking each time loose glass shifted overhead. Shortly before dawn, someone tried the outer gate. The lane was empty, but fresh horse tracks led toward the hall, and a wooden peg had been driven into the soil beside the warm inspection cap, red survey cloth fluttering from its top. Giles was no longer measuring around the glasshouse. He was preparing to divide it. She carried the peg to Pelling's office in Wells. He rubbed the cloth between his fingers. Removing a peg can be called interference. Driving it through my water channel can be called trespass. Both may be true. Giles can afford the longer argument. He read the boundary clause again, the north wall, the old hawthorn line, and all channels serving the propagation beds. The estate tracing ignored that final phrase. An original tithe map could settle it, but the parish copy had been missing since a vestry fire in 1862. Find proof on the ground, he advised, and keep witnesses when you do. She returned with a measuring chain, chalk, and ruled pages from Pelling's clerk. Hugh held one end at the outer wall while Martha recorded each length. The warm conduit served 4 beds, crossed beneath the gate, and ended at a stone basin near the hawthorns. Pritchard's line cut through it twice. They spent the next week reclaiming the western bay. Hugh braced one roof rib with ash poles. Martha cleaned old putty from every usable pane. Rosamund paid 7 shillings for nails and lime, leaving herself 9 pence. A farmer supplied 12 panes for the promise of 2 grafted pears. By Saturday, 41 mismatched panes enclosed a space no larger than a cottage parlor. Ugliest glasshouse in Somerset, Hugh said. It only needs to be the warmest, Rosamund said, pressing putty around a bottle green pane. She chose 2 slender scions from the flowering branch and sealed the cuts with grafting wax, her hands remembering the motion from her father's nursery. Martha brought 6 seedlings from a hedge where birds had scattered fruit. 4 of the roots were sound. They joined the scions to 2 seedlings and tied each graft with wax thread, then gave the rest common cuttings as controls. Rosamund marked every pot, date, and temperature in a new book. On the 3rd morning, the rare scions still held their blossoms. The control buds stayed tight. Hugh brought Ada Pike to see. Ada had a seamstress's narrow shoulders and tired eyes. Pritchard says she'll lose her place at the dairy if she keeps coming. I can't promise wages yet, Rosamund said. She never had wages at the dairy. They called her meals payment. Ada looked through the repaired panes. Promise she'll learn something worth carrying away. That I can promise. Word of the graft's success traveled through the village. 3 tenants placed orders and left deposits totaling £1 11 shillings, which she spent almost as quickly on coal, oil, and lath. The first hard rain tested their work. Water found 2 seams, but the braced rib held. When Martha suggested pushing on before market day, Rosamund refused. That east wall has moved an inch. We touch it after a mason sees it. Most owners would hide the crack and sell twice as much, Hugh said. Then they'd bury a customer beneath their bargain. She lost 1 sale that afternoon, but 2 others, hearing why, brought sound panes salvaged from a demolished dairy. Giles arrived on the 8th day and found Martha at the bench and Hugh fitting lath overhead. You're employing my tenants against me. Martha is learning. Hugh chooses his own work. The mortgage will choose for all of you soon enough. He set the red peg on the bench. Leave it where my men put it next time. After he left, she knelt under the tree a long while, running her fingers over the bark the way she might read a letter. Beneath 40 years of rough growth, 3 graft scars formed a deliberate ladder, each angled toward a different inspection cap. Her father had used marks like these, back when a paper label might be lost and a cut in living wood could not be. At the lowest scar she found a strip of corroded zinc wound around the root crown. 4 stamped characters had survived. L.H.12. The number led her to the 12th inspection cap, buried beneath a fallen staging board where the warm water ran strongest. A narrow branch pipe turned off toward the split boiler. That thing was already old when I worked here, Hugh said. Did anyone open it? Mr. Roland Harrowby kept the key. After Miss Lavinia died, he dismissed everyone who'd worked under her. It was the first time he'd spoken her whole name. Lavinia Harrowby had been Giles's great-aunt, unmarried her whole life. The family Bible recorded only her birth and death. What did she grow? Pears that lived where other pears failed. She taught widows to graft them. My mother was one. Hugh remembered no papers, no secret fortune, only rows of stools, women carrying knives in leather rolls, beds that cost no coal. Roland closed the nursery within a month of the funeral. Rosamund still had, packed among her personal books, 6 years of Broadmere's orchard accounts, kept because Matthew trusted her sums better than his own. Augusta had let her take the box, certain it held nothing but recipes. It held 6 winters of fuel charges for a boiler with no fire grate, no chimney connection, no ash pit. At Pelling's office, she laid the accounts beside a rubbing of the brass collar. Someone billed the estate for heat supplied by water. Giles will say the coal was delivered elsewhere, under the wrong heading. For 6 winters? A pattern persuades. It doesn't always prove. He found Lavinia's probate reference at the county registry. Her estate had included 2 cider orchards and an annuity described as charitable maintenance. The supporting schedule was absent from the copy. Can a schedule simply vanish? Paper vanishes easily when the keeper benefits from losing it. The parish rate book gave them a second trail. Its cover had warped in the fire, but the pages for 1,841 remained legible. The North Nursery appeared as a holding separate from the estate, under Lavinia's name, with 12 narrow plots beneath it, each beside a woman's surname and a rent of 1 peppercorn. In 1856, a heavy line crossed all 12 names. The next page transferred the cider orchard income to general estate improvement in Rosamund Harrowby's own hand. Martha read the surnames twice. Fenwick is here. Hugh's mother, Rosamund said. This proves the nursery existed, and that Lavinia held it apart from the estate, Pelling said, after copying the page and having the church warden witness it. It still doesn't give us her missing schedule. It gives us 12 women whose work was later erased, and a man who very much wished them forgotten. The next fortnight brought thawing rain and real progress. She sold 8 common grafts and took orders for 20 more. Receipts reached £4 3 shillings against £2 11 spent on glass, lath, lime, coal and food. Hugh accepted meals until she could pay him properly. Martha refused payment, then stayed anyway. The Western Bay held its heat at night now. Rosamund learned that turning the third cap lowered the flow, while the seventh sent the warmest water beneath the propagation bench, a system built, plainly, for someone standing exactly where she now stood. One afternoon Giles entered with a folded bank draft. £50. Enough to clear your smaller bills and start again in Bristol. The mortgage is 57. I'll assume it separately. The offer valued the ground at more than he'd admitted. She set the draft beside the false coal accounts. What will the bottling company build here? For 1 second his composure loosened. Village gossip has improved. They need the spring. They need a level approach road. Sign, and you can stop sleeping beside a stove. No. Giles tore the draft across. That evening she and Hugh cleared the rusted casing off the boiler. The bolts were shaped like small leaves, each pointing toward the center plate. No engineer's numbering here, nothing an ordinary tradesman would trouble with. A gardener had marked this machine. Rosamund fitted her knife under the plate. The rust gave way with a dry crack. Warm air touched her face, carrying the smell of wet clay and old paper. Behind the false firebox, stone steps descended into the dark. Hugh tied a rope round the casing before letting her put her weight on the first step. She went down sideways, shoulders brushing both walls, Martha holding the lantern above. The space below was an inspection vault, barely wide enough to turn in. Terracotta pipes met a bronze manifold, where clear water passed through a covered basin before dividing into 12 channels. A thermometer read 54 degrees. Outside, ice still edged the puddles. A warm spring, she called up. She used the ground's own heat. At the far end, stoneware cylinders rested in a tiled rack above the waterline, each sealed with wax and sleeved in zinc. The paper smell came from one cracked lid. Lavinia ordered these from Staffordshire, Hugh said. Roland told anyone who asked they held fertilizer. She carried the sound cylinders up herself. Pelling arrived before she opened one, bringing his clerk and a photographer, and insisted on 2 witnesses for every lid. The first cylinder held folded temperature tables, air, soil, and water, measured 3 times daily across 17 winters. The second held grafting diagrams for 12 pear rootstocks. Root 12 carried a rare habit. Joined above a double interstem to a local pear, it could flower after severe frost without exhausting the tree. Rosamund compared the drawings with the scars on the living branch. Every angle matched. This is why the cuts form a ladder, she said. They identify the stock after a label is lost. Can we make more? Martha asked. If the roots remain healthy. One flowering branch alone proves very little. The third cylinder held letters from women who had trained at the nursery thanks for tools, wages earned selling young trees. Hugh recognized his mother's handwriting on a note about 9 shillings paid for 20 grafts. He read it without speaking, then pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. The fourth cylinder was empty except for a torn index page. It listed a trust schedule, a boundary drawing, and a paper submitted to the Western Horticultural Society in 1848. Beside all 3 entries, someone had written one word: removed. Roland? Martha asked. We don't know, Pelling said. Notebooks establish a history. They don't settle title. The final line of the index gave them one more thread. A duplicate of that paper had been lodged with the society under its own number. Pelling wrote to Bath that afternoon. The secretary answered that the older papers had been moved after a roof leak and remained uncatalogued. A search might be permitted, but not before the quarterly meeting, which fell 2 weeks after Rosamund's mortgage came due. They spent 3 days making careful copies, and Rosamund locked the originals in an iron seed chest, wearing the key on a cord round her neck, and left the vault sealed under one of Pelling's paper strips. The discovery changed the nursery's prospects faster than it changed her standing at law. 4 growers came to see the rare grafts, and she refused to sell so much as a cutting of Route 12 until a full season had proven it. She sold common stock instead and took deposits of £9 against 60 trees for autumn. The mortgage lender accepted £10 on account and granted 30 more days on condition the Western Bay pass a mason's inspection. Hugh reckoned sound braces and brickwork would cost £7 4 shillings. "We can meet that," Martha said, "if every buyer pays and nothing else breaks," Rosamund answered. Giles arrived the next morning and found Pelling's paper seal across the firebox. He did not ask what lay behind it, which troubled her more than any question would have. "You've damaged estate machinery," he said instead. "The machinery stands on my parcel. That remains disputed." His eyes went to the seed chest. "My solicitor will require a full inventory of anything removed." Pelling handed him one. Giles barely glanced at it before returning it, and that carelessness troubled her more than anger would have. He knew enough to fear this place. Yet the notebooks had plainly surprised him. Whatever he'd hoped to find in that vault had not been sealed inside any cylinder. As he turned to leave, Pritchard's eyes went, unbidden, to the warm basin beyond the hawthorns. The spring itself. That was the thing Giles had come looking for. Giles offered £120 for the nursery 2 days later. Land, spring, pipes, and every plant rooted within the boundary. Named individually. Common tree deliveries had brought in another £7 12 shillings. She had set aside £7 4 for the mason and kept 8 shillings for food, fuel, and wax. "You called the pear diseased," she said, reading his final clause twice. "I'm paying for a clean title. Then exclude the plants. Take the money while it remains available." The sum could have bought her a fresh start of her own. It could also bury Lavinia's work beneath a bottling yard. She set the unsigned agreement on the stove, where an ember browned its corner. "My answer remains no." Giles left with the paper rolled beneath his arm. By evening, Pritchard had dismissed Martha from the dairy and served Ada notice to quit her cottage within 7 days, citing an unpaid rent balance of £4 6 shillings Ada had never seen before. "They deducted rent from my washing money," she told Rosamund. Pritchard kept the book. Pelling could challenge the account, but an answer would arrive after the eviction date. A cottage near the chapel stood empty. Its owner wanted 6 months in advance, £5 12 shillings, very nearly everything Rosamund had set aside for the mason. She counted the coins twice, as though counting again might change the sum. "The Pikes can stay in the shed for a week," Hugh offered. "There's one cot and no proper door." "Then let the law make Giles ashamed. Shame won't put a roof over them." She paid the chapel owner and used 12 more shillings for coal and cartage, leaving the mason exactly £1. He agreed to begin with the most dangerous pier and withhold his certificate until the balance was paid. Ada moved on a wet Monday. 3 village women came with barrows, though none had entered the Glasshouse before. Mr. Sayer lent his cart and claimed, unconvincingly, that the horse needed exercise. Martha set Lavinia's letter from Hugh's mother above the new stove. Ada asked that every shilling be recorded as a loan. Rosamund set a fair piece rate for Ada's wax ties and reduced the debt with each bundle. By nightfall, the first 6pence had moved from one column to the other. "She earned 9 shillings from 20 grafts," Martha said. "I'll earn the rent back." "Learn first," Rosamund told her. "Earning follows sound work. The choice cost more than money." The bank agent inspected the unfinished pier on Wednesday and refused the certificate. "Commerce isn't collateral until customers pay," he said. "They pay on delivery. In autumn. Trees don't grow according to a banker's quarter. Mortgages do." He gave her 10 days to produce the remaining £6 4 shillings, and mentioned that Giles's bottling company had already offered to purchase the debt if she failed. Rosamund increased common grafting without touching Route 12. Martha could now make a clean splice. Ada stitched ties at the cottage. Hugh built cold frames from discarded sash. Work continued after dark, paced by the stove's appetite and the limits of their hands. Then a hard late frost struck. The system kept the western bed above freezing, but the outer pipes began losing pressure. Grit had been packed into the northern inlet, pushed through by hand, not weather. She and Martha cleared it by lantern light. Water returned slowly. One graft split, then another. She moved the weakest pots near the stove and accepted the loss of 6 trees. At dawn, Giles watched from the other side of the hawthorn line. "The spring rises on Broadmere land. I can close it whenever I choose." Rosamund held up Lavinia's boundary description. "The channels serving these beds pass with the parcel. According to a deed you haven't found." He knew about the missing schedule, knew it by name, and only the witnesses inside the Western Bay had ever heard Pelling speak of it. Behind him, Pritchard carried a leather case from the direction of the county bank. That afternoon, a notice appeared on her gate. The mortgage had been assigned to Giles Harrowby. Payment in full was due in 7 days. Pelling challenged the assignment the morning it was filed. The bank had every right to sell it, he explained, yet Giles could not damage the property while demanding payment against its value, a distinction that needed a judge, while Giles needed only a clerk. Rosamund raised £23 in 6 days. Growers paid early. Mr. Sayer bought every sound pane she'd salvaged, then quietly returned half as a gift from his wife. Hugh offered the £11 he'd saved for his burial. She pushed the purse back across the bench. I won't preserve a nursery by spending your grave, Hugh. I won't need the grand stone my sister chose. You'll keep the choice. Giles refused her money. On the 7th day, a bailiff named Cobb arrived with an order granting possession until the debt and boundary claim were heard. Personal tools and movable stock may leave, he said. Fixtures and rooted plants remain. She removed her grafting knife, account books, and the 2 potted root 12 grafts. Giles objected, but Cobb allowed them through. The old pear and sealed cylinders stayed behind. Martha's hand closed round the smallest pot. We could come back after dark. And give Giles the trespass he wants? It cost Rosamund something to say it. No. We win this in daylight. Cobb locked the gate with a court chain. Rosamund and Ada moved the pots to the chapel cottage, where one south window gave barely enough light. That night, Pritchard's men dug a trench beside the northern basin, within Broadmere's own field, beyond the chained gate, and diverted the spring into an open ditch. By the time witnesses arrived, the western caps had gone cold. Giles replied that he was surveying water for the bottling company and had touched no disputed land. The temperature dropped to 19 degrees. Rosamund stood outside the chain while frost silvered the last blossoms and could do nothing. Let me break one window, Martha said. I can cover it before Cobb knows. Rosamund gripped the iron links until they hurt. He'll know, because Giles will tell him. Then the court hears about us instead of the water. Before dawn, a section of the eastern wall fell into the repaired bay, breaking 27 panes and crushing 34 common grafts. Hugh found fresh earth missing beneath the wall, exactly where Pritchard's trench had cut across its foundation. Giles arrived with a photographer at sunrise and posed beside the fallen brick, calling the Glasshouse in immediate danger to the village. By noon, his account had reached Wells. 2 growers cancelled their orders. A third demanded his deposit back. The refunds cost £3 8 shillings. One buyer accused her of hiding the wall. Another admitted Giles supplied half his orchard credit and could ruin him for staying loyal to her. She released both men without argument. The old pear's blossoms browned over the next day. Its youngest branch split near the half-severed root. Pritchard gathered the fallen petals into a sack, methodically, as though tidying a garden. Why collect dead flowers? Ada asked. Because Giles plans to say they never existed. Pelling obtained a preservation order within 48 hours. It stopped further digging and allowed one supervised inspection. Rosamund found the seed chest forced open. One temperature book was gone. The paper seal had been cut and pressed back with different wax. Giles denied entering the vault. The mason named removal of supporting soil as the cause of the collapse. The photographer's plates showed the trench, the broken pipes, and Pritchard's boot prints beside the diverted basin. Near the basin, Rosamund saw a squared stone newly exposed by the digging. Lavinia's initials were cut into it, along with the number 12 and an arrow pointing through the Glasshouse gate. Giles had tried to erase the boundary. His own trench had uncovered its oldest marker. That stone gave Pelling 6 more weeks against foreclosure, and persuaded the Western Horticultural Society to open its uncatalogued archive early. Rosamund traveled to Bath with Martha, Pelling, and 1 root 12 graft wrapped in damp moss, the second staying with Ada under Hugh's care. The secretary, Edwin Lark, led them into a storeroom above the library, where roof repairs had displaced 40 years of submissions into plain cases. Lavinia's index number appeared on a case credited to Rosamund Harrowby. Inside lay a report on root warming, frost resistance, and double interstem grafts. The published title named Roland. The working pages, in a hand Rosamund now knew as well as her own, carried Lavinia's initials beside every trial and named 12 women as paid cultivators. Martha found a sealed linen envelope beneath the report. Lavinia had written across it, To be opened if the North Nursery ceases its work or my authorship is disputed. Inside lay a certified copy of the 1841 boundary drawing and the missing charitable schedule. Lavinia's mother had bought the nursery acre with her own marriage portion and conveyed it to her daughter. The warm spring, channels, glasshouse, and access gate all stood within the parcel. A later settlement placed the 2 cider orchard rents in trust to maintain 12 training plots for widows and tenant daughters. A private letter explained why the duplicate had gone to Bath. Roland had removed Lavinia's name from her first society paper and warned that her trainees would lose their cottages if she challenged him publicly. So she had protected them while she worked and placed the evidence where her brother could not quietly burn it. The letter held no request for revenge, only that the cultivators be named and paid for the trials they'd performed. Beside that sentence, 12 women had signed in 12 distinct hands. The head cultivator may receive a salary from plant sales, Lark reads slowly. She is appointed by the working beneficiaries and confirmed by the society. Rosamund looked at Martha. Lavinia had built this to support women's work, not merely to preserve her own name. Route 12, the papers showed, was a hardy foundation stock, selected over 23 years, that carried local varieties through severe frost and waterlogged clay. Lavinia never sold it outright. Each trained woman received living material and returned 2 successful stools to the nursery. Roland closed the plots before that network could reach the neighboring counties. Matthew's father had bought the Glasshouse's private dwelling interest outright, and Matthew had left it to Rosamund in his will. The trust itself held only the nursery's purpose and the rights to the spring. Giles owned neither. He had served as trustee since his own father's death, and had been quietly diverting the orchard rents into Broadmere's general accounts the whole time. "Can this graft prove the stock survived?" Pelling asked. "The marks identify the sequence," Rosamund said, turning the pot. "But marks can be copied. We need growth." She cut a dormant bud from the graft and joined it to a common seedling in the society's forcing house. Lark sealed the label and set 2 gardeners to observe it. Over the next 5 weeks, the bud opened without blackening. Its leaf shape, timing, and graft response matched Lavinia's tables exactly. A handwriting examiner traced Lavinia's annotations across 30 years of correspondence and found no inconsistency. The county registry, using the witnesses named in the Bath copy, located the memorial number of her settlement, confirming the deed had been enrolled in 1841. Giles's motive emerged from his own accounts. He had promised the bottling company exclusive use of the spring for 20 years. Their advance covered his overdue interest at the county bank. The altered tracing, the false coal charges, and every ounce of pressure on Rosamund had protected that one contract. Pelling filed claims for trespass, waste, diverted trust income, and removal of evidence. Ada, Hugh, the mason, Cobb, and the photographer gave statements. 3 growers restored their orders once Larka's preliminary report reached them. When the Wells County Court set the hearing, Giles announced that Rosamund had fabricated Lavinia's papers to rescue a failed nursery of her own invention. Rosamund answered by asking the society to bring the living graft. The courtroom in Wells filled before the clerk opened the doors. Ada sat with the nursery accounts on her lap. Hugh wore the same coat he'd used bracing the Western Bay. Martha carried the living graft the entire way in, and did not once put it down. Giles arrived with Augusta and 2 London solicitors. His argument was simple. The private mortgage was valid, the charitable purpose had lapsed, and Rosamund had used old family papers to create value out of what had, until recently, been a worthless bequest. Judge Wetherill examined the 1841 registry index first. The bound volume had remained in county custody for 36 years, and its memorial number matched the certified schedule from Bath exactly. The librarian and Lark described the sealed envelope and its opening. Pelling supplied photographs taken before Giles gained possession. Giles's counsel turned to the pair. "Mrs. Harrowby, you ask this court to believe a winter blossom identifies a plant selected before you were born." "The blossom drew my attention," Rosamund said. "The graft sequence identifies the stock, a sequence you reproduced yourself." He pointed toward Martha's pot. "Under observation, using material from the old root. So your own hand created the evidence." She asked for Lavinia's diagram, and showed the court 3 cuts at measured distances, each made in a different year of growth, the oldest union buried beneath bark that had thickened, unbroken, for decades. Lark's report matched leaf form, bud timing, and response to warm roots across the old tree in both grafts. "I can copy the angle today," she said. "I can't place 40 years of bark over it." The judge allowed Larky's report, but understood, as she did, that the plant alone couldn't settle a question of ownership. It was the deed, the registry, the rate book, and the access gate together that established the chain. Martha testified about the reopened training plot and the 6 weeks she'd worked without formal wages. Giles's counsel suggested she'd invented the arrangement after finding Lavinia's letters. "Mrs. Harrowby taught me before she knew there was a trust," Martha said, her voice steadier than Rosamund had ever heard it. "The papers gave the work an old name. They didn't create it." Ada produced the piece rate book and her reducing rent balance. The entries showed the nursery's stated purpose was already operating when Giles shut the water. Pelling then produced Giles's agreement with the bottling company. Its directors had withdrawn once they learned the spring was disputed. The contract described the water source as the warm inlet adjoining Marker 12, within the North Nursery conveyance of 1,841. Giles had signed it 4 months before adding the new line to Broadmere's map. "You knew the marker and the conveyance," the judge said over his spectacles. "I knew an estate description," Giles said, rising too quickly. "I didn't accept its validity. Yet you sold 20 years of water under that description." Pritchard was called next. At first he claimed the trench followed a natural drain. The mason's measurements showed it cut directly beneath the fallen wall. Cobb testified that the structure stood when he chained the gate. When Pelling produced the altered tracing, Pritchard's confidence failed entirely. Giles had ordered him to copy the old estate map and move the boundary to the inner drain. Pritchard admitted removing the temperature book after the chain went on and delivering it to Giles's study. The missing book was recovered that afternoon. The judgment took 2 days. Rosamund's dwelling interest and the trust's nursery rights were confirmed. Giles was removed as trustee and ordered to restore the spring, repair the damage, and account for 6 years of diverted rents. His trespass damages exceeded the mortgage balance, which the court declared satisfied by Seedoff. The society and 3 working beneficiaries would appoint new trustees. The altered map and removal of evidence were referred for separate criminal review. Giles lost the bottling contract immediately. The county bank froze further advances against Broadmere until the trust was repaid. Outside, reporters surrounded her. Rosamund gave them Lavinia's name, the names of the 12 original cultivators, and nothing about herself beyond her position at the nursery. Augusta passed without speaking. Giles stopped on the steps. "You've broken the estate for a row of pear trees." "Your accounts broke it," she said. "The trees kept their own record." Cobb returned the cracked iron key before sunset. At the Glasshouse, workmen had reopened the spring under the mason's supervision. Warm, muddy water entered the western channel, sluggish but unmistakably alive. The old pear looked dead from the lane. Rosamund cut below the split branch, then lower again. At the root crown, her knife found a narrow crescent of green, no wider than a fingernail, and she stood a long moment simply looking at it. She did not try to rebuild the whole glasshouse that spring. The eastern wall needed new foundations, and 2 ribs had twisted beyond repair. She closed that half behind a timber screen and spent the first trust payment on drainage, sound brickwork, and wages. The court's account returned £318 in diverted rents and damages. 47 cleared the mortgage by Seetoff. 76 repaired the spring, the western roof, and the fallen wall. The rest stayed in trust for tools, wages, and future building. Rosamund accepted £45 a year as head cultivator, with use of the potting shed rooms once a proper bedroom was added. Ada became the nursery's bookkeeper and tie maker. Hugh supervised repairs, drawing weekly wages he counted twice before putting them away. Martha signed a 2-year apprenticeship at 6 shillings a week. "6?" she said, staring at the paper. "The dairy gave me meals. The nursery pays for trained hands." The first Route 12 stools came from the 2 potted survivors. Rosamund cut no more material than each plant could bear, layered the shoots into warm soil, and recorded every failure. Of 24 attempts, 16 lived. The old pear produced 1 new shoot above its surviving crown. By autumn, 8 women worked regular hours in the restored western bays. 4 were widows. 3 were tenant daughters previously paid only in food. The oldest had spent 20 years thinning apples for Giles without seeing her name in an account. Each woman received her own tools, plot number, and share of sales. The work changed the village in smaller ways. Ada no longer depended on estate washing. 2 women rented the chapel cottage together and paid in their own names. Mr. Sayer began stocking grafting wax because nursery workers bought it every week. Even farmers who distrusted the court case admitted that trained winter labor meant fewer broken unions and fewer lost trees. One grower still refused to buy anything carrying the Harrowby name. Rosamund sold him ordinary plum stock under a plain invoice, and let the trees answer the argument the following spring. The nursery sold common trees while the rare stock multiplied. Route 12 remained under trial for another year. Lark arranged plantings on 6 farms with different soils and kept the results public. 5 survived severe frost without trunk damage. 1 failed in standing water, and Rosamund printed that limit in her catalogue. The honesty cost a few dramatic claims. It earned her repeat orders. Giles sold a western orchard and his carriage horses to repay the trust and the bank. Pritchard lost his position after the map inquiry. No criminal sentence followed, but neither man controlled the nursery, spring, or wages again. Augusta moved to her sister's house in Bath. She sent Rosamund 1 parcel containing Lavinia's brass grafting rule and no letter. Rosamund entered the rule in the trust inventory and said nothing more about it. 18 months after the will reading, the eastern wall stood straight again. New panes covered the repaired ribs, mixed with the old green and amber glass the village had brought over the years. The spring flowed clean through cleared channels. The false boiler remained above the inspection stair, its leaf-shaped bolts polished now rather than hidden, a small board explaining what it had once concealed. Hugh asked for 1 more board at the entrance. He painted the names of Lavinia and the 12 women from the 1,841 rate book, his mother's name 4th, and sat on the wall afterward until the paint dried. That winter, Rosamund moved into the 2 rooms above the potting shed, modest and warm, facing the propagation beds she'd built with her own hands. Her account book showed, for the first time, enough orders to pay every wage through spring without touching the trust reserve. On the coldest January morning, white blossoms opened on the old Pear's new branch. No one rang a bell or fetched a reporter. Rosamund checked the water temperature, then called the apprentices to the bench. Martha made the first cut. 8 women followed, setting Route 12 scions into local seedlings beneath the repaired roof. Hugh watched from the doorway while Ada entered each name and plot number in the book. Rosamund tied the final graft with one of Ada's wax strips and stood back to look at what they had made together. Beyond the clear panes, frost covered Broadmere's empty orchard, just as it had that first night. Inside, 12 young trees stood in a warm row, each one carrying a label in the hand of the woman who had made it.